No one noticed him at first, and that was exactly how he seemed to want it. The boy with the rigid shoulders and the unsmiling face, standing just off to the side of the small outdoor stage set up in the middle of a crowded city square, where people bustled past with coffee cups, shopping bags, and the quiet exhaustion of ordinary lives, their attention pulled in 1,000 directions except toward the thin teenager clutching a battered acoustic guitar like it was both a shield and a burden. His name was Daniel Reyes, though that name meant nothing to anyone there, not yet, and as the late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the concrete, the announcer's voice crackled through cheap speakers, calling him up as the final performer in a lineup of street musicians competing for a modest local arts grant, a prize that most people assumed would go to someone louder, flashier, someone who smiled and knew how to sell themselves. Not this boy whose eyes stayed fixed on the ground as he stepped forward, his face locked in an expression so serious it bordered on sorrow, and when he adjusted the microphone, his hands trembled just enough for a few people in the front row to notice, whispering to each other with mild curiosity and even milder expectations. Daniel did not smile once. Not when the crowd clapped politely, not when someone shouted, "You got this, kid," not even when he cleared his throat and leaned toward the mic. And in that brief silence before he began, a strange tension settled over the square, as if something unspoken hovered in the air, because there was a heaviness about him that couldn't be ignored, the kind that comes not from shyness but from carrying something far too heavy for someone so young. And when his fingers finally brushed the strings, the first notes of Hotel California rang out soft and raw, stripped of polish, played not as a performance but as a confession, and people slowed, then stopped, drawn by a sound that felt familiar yet fragile, as if the song itself had been wounded and was trying to heal. Daniel's voice entered quietly, low and steady, lacking the theatrical power people expected, but filled with something else entirely, truth, unfiltered and aching. And as he sang about the dark desert highway and the cool wind in his hair, it was impossible to miss how each lyric seemed to settle deep inside him before it ever left his lips, and still he did not smile, his eyes remaining distant, focused on a place far beyond the stage, a place only he could see. And as the song unfolded, something shifted among the listeners, conversations fading, phones lowering, eyes widening as they realized this wasn't just another cover song but a story being relived in real time. What no one there knew was that Daniel had learned this song from an old cassette tape his mother used to play late at night while cleaning motel rooms, humming softly to herself as a way to forget the ache in her feet and the fear in her chest about how she would raise a child alone after his father disappeared. And that motel, cheap, flickering lights, stained carpets, the constant hum of traffic, had been Daniel's home for most of his childhood, a place where smiles were rare and survival was the priority, where music became the only escape, the only way to imagine a life beyond thin walls and whispered arguments. And as Daniel reached the chorus, his voice cracked just slightly, not from nerves but from memory, and the tiny fracture in his tones sent a ripple through the crowd, because everyone there, whether they knew it or not, recognized that sound. It was the sound of someone holding themselves together by sheer will. Halfway through the song, a woman near the back of the crowd pressed a hand to her mouth, tears suddenly streaming down her face, surprised by her own reaction, while a man beside her stared at the boy on stage, reminded painfully of his own son who had stopped speaking after returning from overseas deployment. And even the judges, sitting behind a folding table with clipboards and skeptical expressions, found their pens hovering uselessly above the paper, forgotten, because something far more important than scoring was happening, something human and unmeasured. Daniel did not play to impress. He played as if each chord was an apology and each lyric a plea. And when he sang, "You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave," his eyes finally lifted, just for a moment, meeting the gaze of the crowd, and in that instant, people felt it, the sense of being trapped by circumstances, by past mistakes, by grief, by poverty, by regret. And suddenly this was no longer a performance in a city square but a shared moment of recognition, a reminder that everyone there carried invisible rooms they could never quite leave. The unexpected turn came near the bridge of the song, when Daniel stopped playing for half a beat, his fingers freezing on the strings as his breath caught, and for a heartbeat, the crowd feared he had forgotten the lyrics or lost his nerve. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, saying, "My mom used to sing this when she was tired." when she thought I was asleep, and the simplicity of that sentence broke something open in the air, because it reframed everything, not as a talent showcase, not as entertainment, but as a son offering the only thing he had to honor a woman who had given him everything. And without waiting for applause or permission, Daniel resumed playing, his voice stronger now, steadier, as if speaking the truth had unburdened him just enough to keep going. By the time he reached the final chorus, the square was silent except for his voice and the gentle strum of strings, and when the last note faded, there was no immediate clapping, no cheers, only a stunned stillness, the kind that follows something sacred, and then, slowly, someone began to applaud, then another, and another, until the sound swelled into a standing ovation so overwhelming it seemed to lift the boy off the stage. Yet even then, Daniel did not smile, his face remaining solemn as tears slid silently down his cheeks, tears he made no attempt to hide, because smiling felt dishonest in that moment, and honesty was all he had ever known. The emotional climax arrived not with the applause, but with what happened next, when one of the judges, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a reputation for being tough, stood up and walked around the table, stepping onto the stage with a gentleness that surprised everyone, placing a hand over his heart before speaking into the microphone, his voice thick as he said, "Son, this isn't about winning a contest," and then, turning to the crowd, he added, "This is about remembering why we listen in the first place," and with that, he announced that the grant would be awarded to Daniel unanimously, not as charity, but as recognition of something rare and necessary, and as the crowd erupted again, something remarkable happened. People began stepping forward, one by one, placing folded bills, business cards, handwritten notes, and even old guitar picks at Daniel's feet, small acts of generosity born not from pity but from connection, from the shared understanding that kindness doesn't always come with a smile and that strength often wears a serious face. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped below the skyline, Daniel sat alone on the edge of the stage, guitar resting across his knees, when a woman approached him, the same one who had been crying earlier, and handed him a simple envelope, explaining that she ran a small music school and that if he wanted, there would always be a place for him there. No cost, no conditions, just a door left open, and Daniel nodded, unable to speak, the weight in his chest shifting, just slightly, into something that felt like possibility. That night, back in the modest apartment he shared with his mother, no longer a motel, but still far from easy, Daniel played Hotel California again, softer this time, and for the first time in years, his mother listened without cleaning, without worrying, sitting still as tears filled her eyes, realizing that her quiet humming in the darkest moments had somehow carried her son into the light, and though Daniel still did not smile, not then, not even as she wrapped her arms around him, there was something new in the room, something warm and steady, the understanding that hope does not always announce itself with joy, that sometimes it arrives quietly, through shared pain and unexpected kindness, and that a single unsmiling boy with a borrowed song could remind an entire crowd, and perhaps the world, that compassion doesn't need perfection, only sincerity, and that when we truly listen to one another, even the saddest melodies can lead us home.